Welcome, everybody. It's the Life After 50 show. I'm Catherine Watson, and I'm your host today, and I'm here with Laura Wayman. She's known as the Dementia Whisperer, and we'll bring Laura on in just a minute to tell us all about herself and get some information about how to become more dementia aware and why it's so important. But first, a word from our sponsor. FindHoustonSeniorCare.com sponsors this show weekly. They are home to the Care Home List, a list of residential care homes in the greater Houston area where you can get prices and connect directly with the owners. The top 20 home care agency list and the top 20 professionals and organizations that you need to know to help you on this journey. So visit FindHoustonSeniorCare.com and get the answers and the help that you need. All right, we're going to go ahead to bring in Laura. Laura, thanks so much for being on the show today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much. It's so important to get this message out, and I am just so appreciative that I can be here today.
Good. Well, we're glad to have you. You've got a wealth of information. I've known of Laura. We haven't actually ever met face-to-face until now, but I've known about Laura and I've followed her for a number of years now. Many of you know that my mother had dementia. My mother-in-law had dementia. We were very involved in the care of both of these women. And like I was telling Laura a few minutes ago, when it first started happening to me, there were not a lot of resources out there that I could find. And I'm so glad that things have changed and there is more information out there. And there are people like Laura that are really sharing a wealth of knowledge and offer so much help to families and professionals who are dealing with the dementia crisis that we have right now.
It is a silent pandemic, Catherine, and many people are on a dementia journey, and many more will be if they're not now. This is a silent pandemic, and over 6 million Americans have some cause of dementia symptoms. It's so amazing as I travel around the United States, when I have the opportunity to travel and share my message. It's amazing that so many people come up to me and either they say right now they're in the middle of their dementia journey or they were a few years ago. And if they're not, they're starting to recognize out in the community that they're being touched by this somehow. If it's maybe a neighbor or they run across somebody in the grocery store, or, it's just so much more prevalent than we all want to admit. But we're going to talk about how our society is in dementia denial and how we can get past that. So we're going to talk about that today.
Great. So Laura, how did you become the Dementia Whisperer? Where did that title come from and how did that all happen?
Well, Catherine, let me tell you a story, because I always like to start any of my trainings or presentations with this story, because it is a perfect example of how dementia affects not just that person with dementia symptoms, but also the caregiver. So I'm going to tell you a story of Peggy. Now, many years ago, when Peggy was only 17 years old, she lived in a small little farming town that was surrounded by many other farming towns. And she was a shy girl. She didn't like to socialize very much. She would prefer to sit in her little room with a book and just kind of be with herself. But her girlfriends were frustrated that she wouldn't get out. And once a month, all these little farming towns would come together and have this big square dance. Peggy usually didn't go, but her girlfriends talked her into going one night. They got her all gussied up. They pushed her into the square dance hall that night. And there happened to be a guest square dance caller there, a young man by the name of Jack. Now, Peggy took one look at Jack and turned to her girlfriends and said, "Oh my goodness, that man is so handsome. I'm going to marry that man." And they all laughed and said, you'll never even go introduce yourself. But she did, Catherine. She went up and she introduced herself. She was talking to him and flirting with him. And before the end of that square dance that night, Jack asked Peggy out on their first date. They began to date over the next year, fell madly in love. So on Peggy's 18th birthday, Jack and Peggy eloped. Now, Catherine, they had a wonderful, magical life together. They had 5 children of their own, and Peggy found that she was such a great caregiver. She loved caring for children. She began to invite foster children into her home, and by the time it was all said and done, she had helped to raise more than 20 foster children alongside of her own 5 healthy children, and every one of those foster children had special care needs. So she would always find a way to give them appropriate care. Now, as they all began to leave the home, Jack and Peggy began to plan for their retirement. And when that last adult child left the home, Jack and Peggy sold their house, bought an RV, and began to travel all over the United States. They lived that retirement dream for about 15 years, but unfortunately, over time, Jack's health began to fail. First, he began to suffer with macular degeneration, and Peggy was caring for him with that. But what she was really concerned about is he began to show signs and symptoms of dementia. She knew, she had seen enough of her friends caring for their parents or their spouses. She knew this was difficult. She gathered Jack up. She took him to their primary physician, and sure enough, they both received the devastating diagnosis that Jack had Alzheimer's disease. Peggy knew this was going to get worse. She knew she had to give him appropriate care, change their lifestyle to do so she could accommodate his decline. So they moved to a little house, sold their RV, and Peggy stepped into that role of being a full-time dementia caregiver. And at first, of course, Catherine, she was doing great. That's just was her calling, was to be a caregiver. But as Jack continued to decline, she began to struggle taking care of him by herself. So she called her family, who's all long distance. They can't come help her. But she calls them and begins to discuss some of these challenges that now Jack's wandering. And so she can't take her eyes off of him for a minute. Sometimes she even has to call the police because he's out the door and down the road, and she has to have them help her find him. He's not sleeping at night. She's exhausted. And sometimes he even doesn't recognize her as his wife and resists her care completely, thinking she's a stranger in their own home. As she's discussing this with her family says, why don't you get some help in there? And of course, she says the same thing, just like you, Catherine. She says, there's no dementia-aware help here. There's no resources. Even the medical community, it takes me almost an hour to convince Jack to go to the doctor. When we go, the doctor comes in, listens to his heart, takes his blood pressure, tells me he has dementia, and sends us home. There's no resources. And so the family says, we'll move back and help you. We'll leave our careers. We'll bring our new families, whatever is necessary. And she always said, nope, I am a caregiver at heart. I will not interfere with your life. So I will do this on my own. And so she continued to struggle. And the family could hear that she was struggling, but she wouldn't let them help her. Then one night, Jack and Peggy were home alone. Peggy had made Jack a wonderful dinner like she always did. But when she sat down to have dinner with Jack, Peggy suffered a massive heart attack. Now, Jack's dementia was so far advanced. He did not recognize that she needed emergency help. Unfortunately, over time, he wandered outside, said something concerning to a neighbor that Peggy was tired and she was sleeping on the floor. So by the time help arrived, Catherine, it was too late. Peggy was gone. Peggy was my mother. That's how I became the Dementia Whisperer. Because I realized the hard way that our society is not dementia aware, that we are not set up in our medical community. We're not set up throughout our community. We're not set up in long-term care. We're not set up to take care of the needs of that caregiver, especially when they constantly resist getting care, thinking they can do it on their own, and they cannot. 68% of the time, that caregiver will get sick and go first, especially if it's the same age spouse. So why does the world need to be dementia aware? Because it will save these caregivers' lives.
Yeah, I can attest to that, Laura. My own sister, when we were caring for my mom, she ended up in the hospital with a massive heart attack. She needed a aorta valve replacement, a mitral valve replacement, and she had, I think, 22 ulcers, 7 of which were bleeding. And, yes, she probably already had these problems, but I guarantee you the caregiving and the stress that we were all under exasperated the situation. And
it turns up the volume.
It really turns up the volume. Yep. And, everybody has genes for cancer and we have genes for different things, but it's a matter of whether you turn them on or not. Right. And when you're in a stressful situation, and caregiving is probably one of the most stressful situations out there. It's emotionally stressful. It's physically stressful because you're trying to physically care for somebody that I know with my own mother-in-law, I used to laugh and I used to say, Patty Jo, it's a good thing you're skinny because I don't know how I do this, because she was 85 pounds dripping wet, but her legs didn't remember to move. So when I would try to get her to the bathroom, it was really difficult, even though she was so skinny, because her body didn't remember what it was supposed to do.
It could no longer process that information that we learned long ago, that loss of processing, of balance and coordination. All of that is learned brain function that we lose when we have a cause of dementia symptoms. And that is one of those unrecognized dementia symptoms that often happens very early because people are waiting. Unfortunately, they have that myth, then they're waiting to watch for memory loss. It is so much deeper than memory loss. Yeah. It is loss of,
depending on the type of dementia, they may not have that much memory loss. Depending on the type of dementia.
Sometimes the memory portion of the brain is never affected. That's why I don't like to call this memory care. It is so much deeper than that. It is dementia care. It is the care of thousands of different dementia symptoms that, like I just said, go often unrecognized. And that's another important part of dementia awareness.
Yeah. So what does it mean to be dementia aware, and how can we become more dementia aware?
Well, an individual or an organization that is dementia aware understands that there is a constant need to seek education. I learn something new every single day about dementia. And it's learning about the many facets of dementia and displaying a high level of knowledge about the many moving parts of dementia symptoms, the multitude of causes, and then having tools that you can use to adapt and respond efficiently. So it's a process of learning and choosing to operate from a place of acceptance instead of the deadly dementia denial that many of us operate out of, simply because we don't understand the importance of becoming dementia aware.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about, why does the whole world need to be dementia aware? And this is such an important part of this message because, Catherine, much of our society is in what I call dementia denial, simply because there's so much to learn about this. And we didn't used to live this long, so we didn't have this much, these many challenges with dementia denial. And in most countries, there's a total lack of awareness and understanding about what dementia actually is, how it affects the person who has dementia symptoms. And the result is that there's a stigma and barriers to good diagnosis and good dementia care.
It's uncomfortable, Laura. It's uncomfortable. Nobody wants to talk about mental issues, and this is a mental issue. And, I can remember, as a young girl, you didn't talk about any kind of mental deficiencies that anybody in the family might have. I mean, that was hush, 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 and it's getting better, but we're not quite there yet.
And we have a little ways to go. You're absolutely right. And it's common. It's common for humans to deny what is painful or frightening. And dementia is overwhelmingly painful and frightening, not only for those who have a cause of dementia symptoms, but also for the caregivers, the family members. The entire community is dealing with this. And honestly, Catherine, I believe, and it has been so successful in my work, the only real true antidote for dementia denial is widespread dementia awareness. When I can be in front of a family member for 90 minutes, for example, with a consultation, get them dementia aware, the light bulb goes off. It's an aha moment. And they'll say, oh, that's why mom does this. And this is how I can manage it. And when I'm in front of staff, they are so appreciative because they say, oh, I can do this. I have some tools instead of throwing these staff members with this huge caring heart on the floor with 15, 20 or more individuals that they're having to care for with no skills or feelings of accomplishment, because what they tend to do is try and communicate like they did before, because that's what we've all learned, and that it's so counterintuitive for them to change.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a big part of becoming dementia aware is changing this misperception about what that word dementia means. Often, just like we were talking about, people believe that dementia is all about memory loss. It is not about memory loss. And it's also not a diagnosis. I just got an email yesterday and someone was asking me, can you tell me if mom has dementia or not? Dementia is not a diagnosis. It's not an illness. It's not a disease. The word dementia is a list of symptoms. Mm-hmm. And if you have a symptom, like Catherine, you understand, if you have the symptom of pain, something has to cause you to have that pain. Right. So if you have a pain in your arm, then perhaps you have an injury. Perhaps you have a pulled muscle. Perhaps you have some kind of blunt force trauma or whatever, a big bruise. So something has to cause that. And the cause is the diagnosis. So if a physician says to you, you have dementia, that's not a complete sentence. You need to be able to be dementia aware enough to say, well, thank you, doctor. But I already know I have dementia symptoms. I'm telling you what those dementia symptoms are. I want to work with you to find the cause. And there is over 100 different causes of loss of brain function that our bodies present these dementia symptoms, telling the world, hey, I'm losing this brain function and I'm showing you with this dementia symptom. And it affects so many parts of the brain. And many of these dementia symptoms, because we're not dementia aware enough, because we have to learn this perception, many of them go unrecognized for years. And these myths and falsehoods cause this lack of understanding and delay in getting appropriate care and a successful care plan and care approach that allows, unfortunately, dangerous declines in health and quality of life for that individual who has the dementia symptoms and for the caregiver, just like my mother. Mm-hmm. My mother was trying so desperately to manage all of these dementia symptoms as my father got worse, without any help or support. And I believe in my heart, I live with this every day, that had I known what I know now, what I'm sharing with you, Catherine, I probably could have saved my mother's life. Mm-hmm. I could have. And it is our duty as dementia-aware individuals, as a dementia-aware society, to get this information out so that we can help and support and inspire these caregivers to make it across the finish line in what I call a dementia care marathon. Mm-hmm. Right? We have to train them. We have to help them. Absolutely. This can go on for up to 20 years.
Oh, that's the thing. It can go on for a long, long time. Exactly. And it's not something that one person can care for somebody with dementia by themselves. You have to have help. You have to have some kind of a team. You have to have a village, as they say. Yes. It makes such a difference. I know with my own family, it was a lot. With my husband's family, it was just my husband and I. So we had to employ help outside of the family to get that help that we needed, because the two of us by ourselves couldn't do it.
No,
And just
we
a lot
need a team.
until you've dealt with somebody with dementia and with all of the things that happen, all of the physical and the mental and the emotional aspects of it, you really don't know what it is to help somebody with dementia and why the caregiver needs that help. Like I said, my sister, almost died. She was in the hospital for 30 days. She almost died because of this. Your mother did die because she couldn't do it by herself. I've spoken to and met countless individuals that, especially spouses, I find spouses are really, and I can understand it. I mean, I've been married a long time. I've been married over 40 years, and you want to protect your spouse if something's wrong. I get that piece, but it's not always the best thing to do. I mean, if you are overwhelmed, are you really the best caregiver? You've got to learn to accept. And I think awareness is the first key, like you said. That is the number one key. Once we're aware of a situation and a problem, then we can get the information that we need to solve the situation that we're in, to find solutions that work for our unique situation. And every situation is different.
Yep. If you've met one person with dementia symptoms, you've only met one person with dementia symptoms.
That's
So
right.
we have to be fluid and flexible in our dementia awareness. We have to customize our care approach to meet the needs, the loss, and the abilities of that person, because we have to balance that. We have to learn specific things about their feelings and emotions, because that's the only thing left that we can actually talk to. And it's so important when we become dementia aware that we understand we're not stopping, fixing, or changing anything. What we're doing is learning to manage it. There's no stopping or fixing or changing this loss. Once it happens, we can't give it back to them. But we can, I'd like to just describe this just really simply. Person who has this brain function loss and showing these dementia symptoms from a cause of progressive loss of brain function, they have what I call a broken thinker. They can no longer think or process or understand or reason millions of pieces of data that come to us with a healthy brain, and we process on autopilot all day long. And it's so many different aspects of that loss. So a good dementia aware caregiver learns to think for that person. But it's 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
It is 7 days a week. It doesn't go away. It only gets harder. So we have to help that caregiver understand that part of becoming dementia aware is learning to care for themselves and asking for help from the outside, from friends, from neighbors, from family, from accepting that help from professionals, finding and building your care quilt. I like to call it a care quilt, because you're going to get different pieces of care in fabric that you're going to sew together in this beautiful care quilt. And that way you can keep your loved one warm and safe and loved and feeling valued when you get this whole quilt of perhaps it's in-home care or a day program, or it's appropriate for you to place them in a good dementia aware care community, or perhaps it's taking turns with families so that you're getting the respite that you need in the home. Everybody's situation is different and unique, and we have to be dementia aware enough to gather our dementia aware forces and build this beautiful care quilt.
I love that. I love that. That's a beautiful way to describe it, as a beautiful care quilt. And we have to learn how to accept help. So, you talk about dementia awareness as being the first key. And I think the second key is acceptance, accepting what has happened and accepting help from others. And that's one of the hardest things for caregivers. We tend to be the type that we always care for everybody else, and we haven't always learned how to accept that help. But one thing I want to bring out to people is when you accept help, you're giving a gift to that person.
Yes.
Because you're allowing them to now be a part of this process and be able to give their gifts freely. And that's a beautiful gift to give them. When you deny your family and you tell them no, push them away and say, I don't need your help. I can do this on my own. It's, I don't want to interrupt your life. You're actually doing them a disservice. You're not allowing them to give of their gifts and to have that connection with the person that you have. And it's a unique connection with someone with dementia. Your relationship takes a different turn. And we were very close. We were like best friends, and our roles changed as the dementia progressed. But it was still a beautiful relationship. It was just different. And I would not trade that time with her for anything, And the same with my mother. I spent not as much time with my mother because I lived out of town. So I would go in every other week and spend about 3 days. My mother-in-law lived in the same town as we did when she was going through her process. So, yeah, it's you don't want to take away that gift from other people.
Absolutely not. Oh, Catherine, I know you miss those two lovely, lovely women in your life, even though it became more and more difficult as you cared for them. I hear this from so many caregivers. It is a struggle, and yet it is a fulfilling and purposeful journey, especially when you are given tools to better connect and understand and communicate with that person. And that's exactly what I teach is how do we connect? How do we speak dementia? How do we get some relief in resistance to care and get some strategies and tools for these challenges? And that's for everybody. That's not just for that family caregiver. That's for the professional caregiver. That's for the fiduciaries. I'm asked often to help fiduciaries who are dealing with clients that have dementia. And of course, one of my favorite trainings is first responders. They are so appreciative when they have these ways to communicate, because they're often almost daily dealing with folks in their community that have dementia symptoms and are calling on our firemen and our paramedics and our police. The caregivers are calling on them for help. Even in the emergency room, the medical community needs these tools to better connect with our whole community. I hear very frightening, almost horror stories about unaware medical associations, clinics, the emergency room, the hospital, where they could have managed this so much more efficiently had they had this different perception, this training, this absolutely essential dementia awareness.
Yeah, I totally agree. Even your primary care doctors, they need the training. We went through a situation with my mother-in-law trying to get her diagnosed, and she would go in there and do what I called pull up the big girl panties when she knew she was getting ready to be tested. And she would pass with flying colors, and he'd say, well, there's nothing wrong, even though I had given him practically a book of all of the bizarre things that she had been doing, and all of the reasons why there absolutely was something wrong. Heck, she had even canceled her appointments with him and showed up on the wrong day multiple times. But he still didn't see that there was a problem. So they need more awareness. Everybody in the continuum of care, anybody that touches a senior's life needs that awareness and that knowledge that comes with the awareness.
I have several different online trainings, which I've had to go online, and I do miss that in-person training and that feedback. But I immediately jumped on the fact that we still need these online trainings. And one of my trainings is for RNs and LVNs I'm in California, by the way. Here in California, they need continuing education credits for their license. And so I developed a special program that is online where these RNs and LVNs can get their CEs. And this is what I hear from them. They say, why didn't we learn this in nursing school? It's so important. Why didn't we learn this way to communicate? And they're so appreciative of that. And of course, I have my first responder training, and the same thing from them. Why didn't we have the opportunity to learn? This is going to help us so much. And so it's not just the care organizations, which of course I spend hours training all of our long-term care, skilled nursing, assisted living, memory care, which I don't like to call it memory care for exactly the reason I talked about, dementia care, in-home help, hospice, all of these organizations. That's what I mean. Why does the world need to be dementia aware? Because if we all have this knowledge, we develop a safety net of dementia awareness, and I have it at my disposal, you have at your disposal, to give these resources to these caregivers that are desperate for it, to these communities. I trained a whole community, a little community, darling community here in California. It's called Colma. Colma, the whole of the city council, the fire department, the police department. I had several in-person trainings for the family caregivers and the entrepreneurs and the businesses. The whole town is dementia aware. That's my dream, Catherine, so that when someone is in that community, there is no fear that their needs will not be met because we built that village to do so.
That is awesome. That is amazing. I love it. Laura, unfortunately, we're running to the end of the show today. I want to put your website up there. It's laurawayman.com. And for those listening to the podcast, that's Laura, Laura, Wayman, WAYMAN.com. I implore you to go to her website. You'll find lots of information there. If you have an organization that needs some help, would like to talk to Laura about, doing a virtual program. I know we can't do in person right now, but we can sure do virtual programs. And I know she'd love to talk to you. We are going to have Laura at the senior conference in September. I'm really excited about that. She is going to be there doing a full program. So you'll be able to interact with her and ask your questions. It'll be a wonderful event. It's going to be September 18th and 19th. So pay attention to this Facebook page, Find Houston Senior Care, and we will get you all of the information you need so that you can join us at that conference, and it is free to attend. So Laura, thank you so much again for being on the show today. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Catherine. Love to everybody out there from the Dementia Whisperer.
Thanks.